She doesn't miss you when you leave. She misses you when you stop protecting her peace. And by the time that realization hits, the man she took for granted is already gone. I'm speaking to you as a female psychologist, and I need you to hear this without ego or anger. Most men think women wake up one day and suddenly regret a breakup, but that's not how the mind works. Regret is delayed, layered, and triggered by absence, not arguments. When a woman takes a good man for granted, it isn't because he lacks value, it's because his value became invisible. Consistency is psychologically dangerous when it's misunderstood. Your reliability, your emotional steadiness, your willingness to stay became the background noise of her life. And the brain is wired to stop noticing what feels permanent. As long as you were there, absorbing stress, solving problems, and choosing her daily, your presence felt guaranteed. The human nervous system doesn't assign urgency to what it believes will never leave. This is where men get confused and blame themselves. You think if you had loved harder, spoken louder, or proven more, she would have valued you. But psychology shows the opposite. The more predictable your sacrifice became, the less emotionally expensive it felt to lose you. Not because you weren't important, but because importance without uncertainty fades from awareness. As a psychologist, I've seen women only recognize a man's worth when their nervous system finally feels the loss. Silence replaces support, consequences replace comfort, and the emotional bill arrives late. That's when memory reframes you. She doesn't remember your flaws first, she remembers your stability. And stability, once gone, becomes rare. This isn't about revenge or waiting for regret. It's about understanding the invisible timeline of value. Women don't feel loss at the moment of departure. They feel it when life demands what only you provided. And that realization hurts precisely because it arrives too late. Right now, I want you to separate your worth from her awareness of it. Value does not disappear because someone fails to perceive it. A woman's delayed regret is not proof you were weak, it's proof you were safe. Safety feels boring until it's gone. This is the psychological trap that costs good men years of self-doubt. Remember this as we go deeper. Being taken for granted is not a reflection of your limits, but of someone else's perception window. Perception shifts only when comfort is replaced by consequence. And when that shift happens, it's usually irreversible. You don't need to wait around to be understood. You need to understand why walking away changes everything. This knowledge is not to harden you, but to ground you. When you stop performing value and start embodying it, the dynamic shifts. And whether she realizes it or not no longer defines you. That is where real power quietly begins. Hold that thought because it explains everything that follows. Most men never learn this truth until pain teaches it personally. Today you learn earlier. Here's the part most men don't want to hear but need to. A woman doesn't take a man for granted because she's cruel. She does it because her brain adapts faster than her heart. Emotional adaptation is one of the strongest psychological forces in relationships. When you consistently show up, regulate emotions, forgive easily, and absorb pressure, her nervous system recalibrates. What once felt special becomes normal. What felt rare becomes expected. This is not a moral failure, it's human psychology. The mind is designed to conserve emotional energy. It stops rewarding what feels secure and starts chasing what feels uncertain. That's why men who are emotionally stable often feel less desired over time, while emotionally inconsistent men create intensity. Intensity is mistaken for depth, but it's just unpredictability stimulating dopamine. As a psychologist, I see this pattern repeatedly. Good men confuse emotional safety with emotional attraction. They believe providing more will earn appreciation, but appreciation doesn't grow linearly with effort. It grows with contrast. Without contrast, the brain dulls sensation. Your presence became the emotional baseline, not the emotional peak. And when you became the baseline, she stopped noticing the cost of losing you. This is where resentment quietly builds. You feel unseen. She feels restless but can't explain why. So she rationalizes. She focuses on your imperfections, minimizes your effort, and tells herself she's settling. Not because you're lacking, but because her nervous system craves stimulation, not stability. This is where many men overcorrect. They try to become colder, harsher, or emotionally distant overnight. That's not strength, that's fear disguised as control. The real shift happens internally. When a man stops over-explaining, stops negotiating his worth, and stops rescuing emotions that aren't his responsibility, the dynamic changes naturally. Women don't value what they're handed freely. They value what requires emotional awareness to maintain. When you start honoring your boundaries without anger, something interesting happens. Her perception sharpens. She feels the loss of access before the loss of the man. That's when confusion sets in. That's when she starts replaying moments she once ignored. But this realization doesn't always lead to reconciliation. Often, it leads to regret. And regret is not love. It's grief mixed with self-awareness. Many men secretly wait for this moment, hoping it will validate their pain. But waiting keeps you stuck. The real win is not being revalued by someone who already lost you. The real win is becoming a man whose value is visible because he no longer overextends it. When you remove emotional excess, your presence becomes intentional instead of assumed. This is not about manipulation. It's about self-respect recalibrating perception. A woman realizes the value of the man she took for granted when she can no longer access the version of him that made life easier. And by then, the man has often outgrown the need to be recognized by her. That's the quiet psychological irony. Recognition arrives when attachment has already shifted. And once it shifts, it rarely returns to where it was. There is a moment that almost no woman talks about openly, but many experience privately. It happens long after the relationship ends, when the distractions fade and life demands consistency. That's when comparison begins. Not the shallow kind, but the deep psychological kind. She notices how rare emotional safety actually is. She notices how many men can excite her temporarily, but cannot sustain her nervous system. This is when memory sharpens. She doesn't remember how available you were. She remembers how grounded she felt around you. The brain reorders emotional data when safety is removed. What once felt boring now feels irreplaceable. And this realization doesn't come from loneliness alone, it comes from contrast. Contrast is the teacher. When a woman experiences chaos after stability, her mind revisits what it lost. But here's the part men misunderstand. This realization does not always produce action. Awareness doesn't automatically lead to change. Pride, fear, and shame often silence it. Reaching out would require admitting misjudgment, and that's emotionally expensive. So instead, the regret stays internal. It shows up as late-night thoughts, subtle curiosity about your life, or quiet comparisons she never voices. This is why many men never receive closure or apology. Not because it isn't felt, but because it's too confronting to express. As a psychologist, I need you to understand this so you stop personalizing silence. Silence is not indifference. It's often internal conflict. But that conflict is no longer your responsibility. The danger for men is romanticizing this delayed realization. You imagine her awakening and coming back transformed. But psychology doesn't work like movies. Growth happens when pain is processed, not when it's avoided. And many people avoid it for years. The healthiest thing you can do is not wait to be revalued. When you rebuild your identity outside the relationship, your self-concept strengthens. You stop defining yourself by how someone else once perceived you. This changes your energy. Not in a performative way, but in a grounded way. And grounded men are felt immediately. Ironically, this is often when women sense the shift. Not because you changed for them, but because you stopped centering them. Attraction returns when attachment loosens. But by then, you're no longer chasing validation. You're choosing alignment. And alignment feels different than longing. This is where emotional maturity quietly separates men. You no longer need her to realize your value for it to exist. You understand that being taken for granted was a chapter, not a verdict. When a woman finally realizes the value of the man she lost, it's usually because he's no longer available in the way she remembers. That realization hurts precisely because it confirms a truth she ignored. And that truth cannot be undone. You don't win by being missed. You win by becoming someone who no longer waits to be understood. That shift changes everything moving forward, and it prepares you for the final truth most men need to hear. Here's the truth that decides whether this story empowers you or traps you. A woman realizing your value does not restore the past. It only confirms it. And confirmation is not compensation. Many men unconsciously live for that moment, the message, the apology, the sudden warmth. They believe it will heal the wound. But psychologically, closure rarely comes from the person who caused the pain. It comes from understanding the pattern and stepping out of it. When you were taken for granted, your mistake was not loving deeply. Your mistake was attaching your identity to being needed instead of being chosen. Being needed feels powerful at first. It feeds purpose. But when purpose replaces boundaries, resentment grows silently. Healthy relationships require mutual awareness, not silent sacrifice. When a woman finally realizes the value of a man she overlooked, it's often because life removed the buffer he provided. She feels the weight she once handed to you without noticing. And that awareness can sting deeply, but awareness alone does not rebuild trust, time, or emotional safety. Those things require consistent presence, and presence cannot be forced backward. This is where mature men separate themselves from bitter ones. The bitter man wants justice. The mature man wants peace. He doesn't need to be understood by everyone who misunderstood him. He only needs to understand himself. When you internalize this, your dating life changes. You stop auditioning. You stop overgiving. You stop trying to prove reliability to people who haven't earned access to it. Instead, you let your standards speak quietly. And psychologically, standards create polarity. Women feel when a man values his time, his energy, and his emotional capacity. Not loudly, subtly. That subtlety is confidence. The man who has been taken for granted and learned from it becomes dangerous in the best way. Not because he withholds love, but because he gives it deliberately. That kind of man is not easily replaced, and he doesn't need to announce his value. It's felt. If a woman from your past realizes this too late, that realization belongs to her journey, not yours. You don't owe your future to someone who couldn't see you clearly in the past. This isn't about closing your heart. It's about opening it with discernment. The goal is not to avoid pain forever. It's to stop repeating the same lesson with different faces. When you choose growth over validation, something powerful happens. You stop being the man women take for granted and start being the man they have to be intentional with. And intention is where real connection begins. Now let me ask you something personal and answer honestly. In your last relationship, was your value equal to your effort, or did effort replace value over time? Write your answer in the comments. If this spoke to you, like the video, subscribe for deeper psychological insights, and share this with a friend who needs to hear it before learning the hard way.